Hello and welcome back. Today I am here with the topic The Selfish Giant from your supplementary book. The Selfish Giant is a beautiful fiction story by Oscar Wilde. This story revolves around a play garden which becomes beautiful in the presence of children and dries in their absence. This story teaches us to treat kids in the kind way. So let's explore the story. Every afternoon, as they were coming from school, the children used to go and play in the giant's garden. It was a lovely garden with soft green grass here and there. Over the grass stood beautiful flowers like stars, and there were 12 peach trees that in the springtime broke out into delicate blossoms of pink and pearl, and in the autumn bore rich fruit. The birds sat on the trees and sang so sweetly that the children used to stop their games in order to listen to them. How happy we are here, they cried to each other. So there was a lovely garden in the city, and kids were used to play there after their school time. It was belonged to the giant. This garden was full of green grass, beautiful flowers shining like stars, and peach trees. In the spring season, the peach trees were full of pink and white flowers, which looked very beautiful. In the autumn season, there were fruits of peach. The nature used to cheer the kids, and the birds used to sing mesmerizing songs. The kids were happy like never before, but their happiness could not survive long. Why? Let's see. One day the giant came back. He had been to visit his friend, the Cornish ogre, and had stayed with him for 7 years. When he arrived, he saw the children play in the garden. "What are you doing here?" he cried in a very gruff voice, and the children ran away. Gruff means rude or rough, and Cornish ogre is the name of a giant. So, as the garden belonged to the selfish giant, he came back. He was at his friend's home for 7 years. But now, when he returned, he saw that the kids were playing and enjoying in his garden. He became very angry and scolded them in his rude voice to not to come there to play. All the kids got scared and ran away from the garden. In the picture also you can see the expressions of the selfish giant and how the children are running here and there by being afraid of him. "My own garden is my own garden," said the giant. "Anyone can understand that, and I will allow nobody to play in it but myself." So he built a high wall around it and put up a notice board that trespassers will be prosecuted. Trespassers mean visitors, and prosecuted means punished. So the giant said that his garden was there only for himself, and he could not allow anyone to enter in his garden without his permission. So only he had the right to rule in his garden. So he raised a strong and high wall around his garden, and also put a notice that no one could enter in the garden without his permission. If anyone dared, he would be punished severely. It shows that the giant was very selfish because he wanted to rule alone in his garden. So, he was a very selfish giant. The poor children had now nowhere to play. They tried to play on the road, but the road was very dusty and full of hard stones, and they did not like it. They used to wander around the high walls when their lessons were over and talk about the beautiful garden inside. "How happy we were there," they said to each other. So the kids were very sad because there was no better place for their play. Though they tried to play on the road, but it was full of dust and stones, so they did not like the place. Now they just roamed around the wall of the garden and reminded the beautiful memories that they shared together in the beautiful garden. Then the spring came, and all over the country there were little blossoms and little birds. Only in the garden of the selfish giant it was still winter. The birds did not care to sing in it, as there were no child, and the trees forgot to blossom. Once a beautiful flower put its head out from the grass. But when it saw the notice board, it was so sorry for the children that it slipped back into the ground again and went off to sleep. The only people who were pleased were the snow and the frost. Spring has forgotten this garden, they cried, so we will all live here all the year around. The snow covered up the grass with her white cloak, and the frost painted all the trees silver. Then they invited the north wind to stay with them, and he came. He was wrapped in furs, and he roared all day about the garden, and blew the chimney pots down. This is a delightful spot, he said. We must ask Hail on a visit. So the Hail came. Every day for 3 hours he rattled on the roof of the castle till he broke most of the slates, and then he ran round and round the garden as fast as he could go. He was dressed in grey, and his breath was like ice. Now it was the time of spring, and in this season all the country was blooming with beautiful flowers and small birds. But in the garden of Selfish Giant there was still winter. So, as the nature was punishing the giant in his own way, and the birds stopped singing because they were also sad in the absence of kids in the garden. The trees were bare, there were no flowers upon them. Once a beautiful flower tried to bloom, but when it noticed that there was no kid, it hid itself in the grass. As a result, there was no spring, only winter was ruling in the garden. The snow, the frost were very happy because they could live there forever. So the snow covered the grass and the frost covered the trees with its white sheet. They also invited the chilly wind of north to also enjoy there. It came and enjoyed all over the garden. Then they invited the hail to come there. Now hail came and ruled all over the garden and the castle both, and then broke all the chimneys, roof slates. Now all these things were ruling and enjoying in the garden of the selfish giant. I cannot understand why the spring is so late in coming, said the selfish giant as he sat at the window and looked out at his cold white garden. I hope there will be a change in the weather. But the spring never came, nor the summer. The autumn gave golden fruit to every garden, but the giant's garden she gave none. He is too selfish, she said. So it was always winter there, and the north wind and the hail and the frost and the snow danced about through the trees. So there was no change in the season. No spring, no summer, only winter was there, all around. Now the autumn season came, and there were ripe fruits on the trees in every garden. But in the giant's garden, the autumn did not enter because of his selfish nature. So there was the rule of winter and its guests only, like snow, frost, north chilly wind, and hail. They were all happily living in his garden. One morning, the giant was lying awake in bed when he heard some lovely music. It sounded so sweet to his ears that he thought it must be the king's musicians passed by. It was really only the little linnet. Linnet is a small brown bird singing outside his window. But it was so long since he had heard a bird singing in his garden that it seemed to him to be the most beautiful music in the world. Then the hail stopped dancing over his head, and the north wind ceased roaring. Ceased means stopped. And a delicious perfume came to him through the open casement. Casement means window. I believe the spring has come at last, said the giant, and he jumped out of bed and looked out. So, the giant was restless because he was waiting for the change in the weather, but there was no change. He did not understand the cause of such a long winter in his garden. He was also hoping for the change in the weather. One morning, when the giant was lying in his bed and thinking about the change in the weather, suddenly he heard the sweet music. The music was so lovely that he thought that the musician from the royal palace was passing through the garden. But it was not the sound of musician. It was the little brown bird singing outside the window. The giant had not heard songs of birds for a long time, so he felt amazing after listening this mesmerizing song of the linnet. Then he opened his window and saw a wonderful sight. The winter left his garden, and with winter its guests, the snow, frost, north wind, and hail, were also gone. The smell of the blooming flowers was coming from his window. The giant was very happy and thought that now his wait was over and the spring came in his garden. So he looked outside and saw a wonderful sight, and he was amazed after seeing this sight. So, children, why was the giant surprised and what did he saw from his window? We'll continue in the next part. Till then, have a happy and joyful learning. Thank you all.